good evening. Welcome to Domination Submission Radio. My name is Mike Makai, and I'll be your host with the most DS, BDSM, kink, and fetish talk on Blog Talk Radio. This is a call-in show, so if you'd like to call in and tell us what you think on the topics that we're discussing this evening, the number is 347-857-1862. Get out your pencil, write this down. You know you're going to call me eventually. Again, 347-857-1862. We also have a chat room at Blog Talk Radio, so if you're listening to us live on Blog Talk Radio, then check out the chat room. Just scroll to the bottom of the page, and you should be able to see it right there. If you're a little shy about calling into the show, then you can always ask your questions or make your comments in the chat room, and we will try to get them on the air. Our website is domination-submission.com. Again, domination-submission.com, and there you can also check out our links to social media like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and our brand new YouTube channel where you can listen to our previous shows on DS Radio on YouTube, so check that out. We have in our studio my co-host, L.B. Shaw. L.B. Shaw is the author of the Trust in Me series of erotic fiction. She's about to release her latest novel, which has a very strong BDSM theme, and it's called Becoming Stone. How you doing, LB?
I'm doing good. How are you?
It's been a long week, but I'm doing better. I'm doing better.
Good.
I'm done being banned at Twitter. Now I'm being banned at Facebook, so it's been crazy.
That's always fun to deal with.
So let me tell you what our topic is today, LB. I know you know what it is, but I'll let our listeners know. Our topic tonight is aftercare. Who needs it? And you were the one who brought this topic to my attention this week, weren't you?
I suppose I was.
I'm very interested to hear what you've got to say about this as we go forward. Our other co-host, Lolita Sin, is otherwise engaged this evening, so we're going to miss her this evening, but she should be back with us next week for our next episode of DS Radio. So let me tell you some of the things that we're going to be discussing when it comes to this topic, and it's a very wide topic, aftercare. And for those of you who don't understand what aftercare is, we will definitely spend some time defining it. That's going to be the very first question, in fact. We're going to ask, what is it? Then we're going to ask, does everyone need it? There's a general belief out there that it's only the submissives or the bottoms that need aftercare. So we'll ask that question, and maybe dominants need it too. We'll also ask the question, what about people who say they don't need aftercare? And there's a lot of them out there. And we're going to also ask, why is it important? We're going to discuss the issues surrounding whether this is something that only addresses the emotional needs of a person or their physical needs or something else maybe. And then, of course, there may be different types of aftercare, so we'll talk about that a little bit. And we're also going to get your thoughts on subspace, sub-drop, dom-drop, top guilt, and there's a few other things we'll talk about too. Things like aftercare kits. You ever had an aftercare kit? What goes into an aftercare kit? What is an aftercare kit? And for those of you who just play online or on the telephone or long distance on Skype or whatever, I want to hear from you. Do you need aftercare following online play? I think there's a lot of great questions there. What do you think, LB?
There are a lot of questions. I think there's a wide variance of whose responsibility it is and to line it up and all of that good stuff. So there's lots of things to address.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The reason you brought this to my attention was you had an experience just recently, and for our listeners, LB and her husband have really just started getting involved in the lifestyle, and so one of the great things that she contributes to this show is a perspective of somebody who's kind of feeling their way through the process of becoming a part of the lifestyle, and it's fairly recent for you and your husband. I grew up in it. I've been in it all my life, so I have a hard time sometimes seeing it from an outsider's view or a new person's view. I take an awful lot for granted sometimes. So tell us a little bit about the experience you had regarding aftercare just recently.
Well, I think we probably have somewhat of a unique situation in that we're both approaching this as newbies, so it makes it a little bit of a challenge. But I don't know that I can go into all of the details just out of respect for my husband and everything, but there was just an experience that we had that I think there were some miscommunications.
Okay. As a submissive and the bottom for the most part. Are you one of those people who feels passionately that you need aftercare following a scene?
It really depends on what we're doing. I guess if we're just doing some like paddling and caning and that sort of thing, I usually don't need any type of aftercare afterwards. That's basically what aftercare is. It's the after scene. But yeah, it depends on what we're doing, and if things get intense, I need time to physically wind down, and I need space and quiet and that sort of thing. But again, it really depends on how intense we're playing and what kinds of things are going on, because sometimes it's just impact play, and sometimes it's a lot of verbal stuff, because I'm an emotional masochist, so there's a lot of verbal things that go on, and that has a completely different effect on me. So it really depends on the situation.
Now, this is probably a good time to try to define this for our listeners. Aftercare is what should happen, at least the view of most people, should happen following a scene of some sort, where you are paying extra attention, or you're attending to the needs of somebody after the scene, attending to their physical or psychological needs while they're going through the process of returning to normal after a heightened sense of awareness, or after this alternate state of consciousness, or whatever happens to them while they're going through the scene. And there are a lot of people who kind of equate this with what sexologists have called for a long time post-coital blues. In other words, the sense of the drop, the blues that you get after you've had really good sex, and now you're coming down from it, and it's kind of this funk that you go into. And there are a lot of people who believe that not only should you pay additional attention to somebody during that phase while they're coming down from this high that they've been on, because they have very intense emotional needs. Sometimes they're very vulnerable during this time. Sometimes they're very depressed during this time, and so they need that extra emotional attention. But there are also sometimes some very important physical things that you have to take care of and to worry about. And I've got a story about that I'll tell a little bit later on. But that's essentially it. It's the extra attention that you give somebody after a scene while they're coming down off of that high. Does that sound like a pretty good definition to you, LB?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is what happens after a scene, and it can last anywhere from, I guess, a few minutes to a few hours to even several days, depending on the individual person's needs.
Mm-hmm. Everyone does this differently, but for the most part, when people are talking about aftercare in this lifestyle, they're talking about just paying extra attention, being a little bit more attentive, hugging, stroking, cuddling, talking, praising somebody, just reaffirming that emotional bond. Remember that there's a lot of masochism and sadism in this lifestyle. Not everyone is a masochist, not everyone is a sadist, but there's a lot of sadomasochistic play, even if, for example, I'm not a diehard sadist, but I enjoy sadistic play quite a bit. And so I think that sometimes people discount the emotional impact of doing things which could be viewed very easily, not just by others, but sometimes your own subconscious mind is looking at what you're doing going, how can you do this to somebody? Or it is a rush and you're filled with all kinds of adrenaline and endorphins and things. And so, everybody has the potential for getting hyped up and just a little bit loopy or high from it. And I think everybody tends, if it's done well, I think it's a phenomenon that everyone experiences, coming down off of that sort of a thing. So we'll definitely be talking about that. There's a lot of controversy over who needs aftercare, whether dominants need it, whether it is owed to a submissive by a sadistic dominant. Remember, a sadistic dominant, he gets his jollies from your pain and your suffering. And so for some people, for some sadistic dominants, withholding aftercare is just a continuation of his sadistic play sometimes. So this is, it gets complicated. It's very, very important. And like I said, I have a story that will tell you just how important it can be. I literally had somebody almost die after a BDSM scene with me. And if it weren't for the fact that I was paying extra close attention, she would have died. So we'll tell you that story right after the break. You are listening to DS Radio. My name is Mike Makai. My co-host is LB Shaw. We'll be back in about a minute and a half. This is Mike Makai. You're listening to DS Radio. My co-host is LB Shaw, and we are talking today about aftercare, whether or not it's needed by everyone. What is it? What about the people who say they don't need it? Why is it important? And all that stuff. So if you have an opinion on this topic, please call in. The number is 347-857-1862. Again, 347-857-1862. By the way, if you're ever needing to listen to the show and you are not near a computer, you can always call that number and you can just listen to the show by calling that number. So, cool little bit of trivia to know. All right, so we were talking about, does everyone need it? What do you think, LB?
I don't think that everyone necessarily needs it. I think that some people might need it and not realize that they do, but I would say that both tops and bottoms are prone to need it, and it's up to the individual to communicate that and to know that ahead of time, if at all possible. But some people, again, it just depends on what sort of play you participate in and how intense it is. Some people may not need it.
You know, I tend to agree with you. I tend to be one of those people that believes that we don't need it. But by the same token, I don't think you can assume that everyone really knows whether they need it or not. Does that make sense? In other words, I believe there are people who don't need it, but I also believe that there are people who need it who believe they don't need it. I know that's probably confusing, but let me give you an example. I'm going to tell this story, and this is a real story. It happened to me almost 20 years ago. So, I mean, it's a story I've told a lot of times, and it's had lasting effects on people. I was involved in a scene one day. It wasn't a public scene, it was a private scene, and I tend to mix a lot of sexual play into my BDSM. I'm not just a whips and chains guy, I'm a whips and chains and sex guy, okay? And this was a pretty intense scene. And one of the things I like to do is I like to bring my partners, I like to bring them right to the edge of an orgasm and then pull back, and then bring them right to the edge and pull back. And it just keeps bringing that plateau a little bit higher and higher and higher so that when it finally does happen, it's a lot of fun. And so on this particular day, I had done that, and I just kept ratcheting up the tension and the suspense and the fun. And when she finally did go over the edge, she went in a big way. And this particular woman is multi-orgasmic, and so she could have many, many orgasms. And so she had one after another. And after about 8 or so, she stopped counting, basically. She just kept going. And to say that it was a fun time would be a huge understatement. But at the end of the scene, you know, we're putting things away, and I'm releasing all of her restraints and things, and we're just kind of lounging around and kind of laughing and joking and having a good time, and she's smiling at me, and I noticed that she's smiling with only half of her mouth. One side of the mouth is smiling, and the other side is just straight. And I went, holy crap. So I grabbed both of her hands, and I said, sit up for a minute. And she didn't realize anything was wrong. I mean, she didn't feel it. She didn't know anything was wrong. And she sat up and said, let me see your hands. I took both of her hands, and I said, all right, push down my hands. And this is a strength test that they do that I was taught when I was in the military. Anyway, so she had no strength in her left hand, and which was also the side of her face that she wasn't smiling on. And I went, holy crap. So I called the emergency room. I called the hospital emergency room. I said, hey, what do we do? And they said, get her here immediately. So, I mean, literally, I barely even let her get dressed. I threw her in the car, and I took her straight to the ER. And it turns out that she had had a stroke. She had had a walnut-sized hemorrhagic stroke in the right side of her brain. And when they did an MRI, you could literally see it. It was the size of a walnut in her brain, where she had literally blown a gasket because of all of the multiple orgasms and things. And it turns out that unbeknownst to her and anyone, no one knew this, she suffered from high blood pressure, hypertension. She didn't know it. And this particular scene just spiked her blood pressure so much that she literally blew a gasket in her brain, and she didn't know it. She didn't feel anything. Nothing felt unusual to her. And if it hadn't been for the fact that I noticed that she was only smiling halfway, well, this is what the doctors told me. If I had not taken her to the ER that night, she could have died. All right, so it's a very serious thing, and this is one of the things that convinces me that not everyone knows for sure whether they need aftercare or not. And aftercare doesn't necessarily have to be all about hugging and cuddling and saying nice things to somebody. Sometimes aftercare is simply a matter of paying additional attention to somebody afterwards to make sure that they're going to be okay, whether that is emotionally okay or physically okay or whatever, relationship-wise okay. Sometimes it's, like you were saying, LB, sometimes it's just you expected something and you're not getting it, and now you're pissed or now you're upset, and that's not necessarily related to sub-drop or dom-drop or any kind of physical conditions. Sometimes it's just a matter of you're expecting one thing and you're getting something else entirely. So I think it's important that aftercare is talked about, and as you said, LB, it needs to be talked about before the scene, not after a scene. Does any of that ring true with you, LB?
Yes, and I just love when you share stories that scare the crap out of me.
All my stories scare the crap out of you. I don't know why.
Well, yeah, but yes, it's a great point to make, and yeah, you never know what could go wrong. Anything could happen, and I think that particular scenario is, hopefully that's not something that happens. I mean, your body goes through a lot of stuff. I mean, we haven't engaged in anything really physically intense yet, but for me, I didn't even, aftercare, that was not something that had really crossed my mind a whole lot. It's something that we would need, because I think it's different when you're playing with someone that you're not in a relationship with, or maybe you don't know all that well. So even if you're at a party and there's other people around, it can still affect you, because some people have said they just kind of felt used and then tossed aside afterwards. And of course, I don't face those problems because there's a lot of love there, and I see them every day and I communicate with them all the time. But yeah, there's a lot of things that could go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And here's the scary thing, is I talked about the immediate effects of her experiencing the stroke from the scene, but here's where it gets really scary. She spent the next 3 weeks in the hospital, all right, and following that, she was scared to death of having an orgasm. So this is something that affected her for years following it, because, here she is thinking, oh, my God, if I have an orgasm, I could die. I'll blow another gasket. And not only that, but when somebody has had a stroke, they're afraid to go down the street. I can't walk down the street because I might just keel over and have a stroke and die out there in the middle of the street, and nobody will be there to help me. It has very lasting effects on people, psychologically, physically, and relationship-wise, because you can't go through those sorts of things in your relationship. Really, it has a huge effect on your relationship. I mean, just imagine for a moment how your relationship, or anyone's relationship, would suffer if you suddenly develop a terrible, life-threatening phobia of having an orgasm. It can have really serious effects on that. So we are going to bring somebody online. We have a caller, and this is my friend Red, and talk to her for a little bit, and then we'll take a break. So let's bring her online and see what she's got to say about my scary story. How you doing, Red?
I'm doing good. How about you, sweetie?
Not bad. Did I scare you?
No, because I'd already heard about that story, so I was kind of prepped for it.
I've told that story to somebody that I'm getting to know, and we're just starting to date or something, and I'll tell that story, and the reaction is almost always the same. It's like, I don't want to die. So, I don't tell that story a lot because it does scare people.
Well, it's a very valid point. I mean, there's conditions people have that they're not aware of that nobody could have predicted, and this is things people need to be aware of. You need to look for certain signs and symptoms, especially if you've done intense scenes, because they may have a condition and be completely unaware of it.
This is true. It's true. I think most people in this lifestyle, they focus in on the emotional side of aftercare. It's like, oh, yeah, you got to give hugs and cuddles. And, of course, there are Yeah, there are people like me, like when somebody says, you got to give me hugs and cuddles, my first reaction is like, yeah, right, in your dreams. I mean, I immediately go into my Dom mode, don't tell me what to do kind of a mode, you know? But I think it's really important. I think it's a lot more important than just hugs and cuddles. I don't know. So what else did you have to say on this, Red? And then we'll go to a break in just a few minutes and bring you back after.
The emotional aftercare is important to some people. I'm predominantly not one of them. But the physical aspects of aftercare are excruciatingly important. A lot of people need medical training if they're going to do heavy scenes, because you very well may come into a situation that has that, or your partner may very well have a heart attack. Yep. Or some mistakes happen, accidents do happen, and a bone gets broken. Shock starts to set in. Bleeding problems happen with some of the more intense scenes with knife play and things like that. Accidents happen. You have to be physically able to take care of their physical needs, not just the emotional needs.
I think that's a great point. In fact, we're going to talk about that after the break. One of the things we're going to talk about is an aftercare kit. I don't know if you've ever had one or heard of one, but maybe we'll talk about what should go into an aftercare kit. We'll also talk a little bit about the various different kinds of aftercare. I think there are different modes of aftercare that vary according to the people and according to what kind of a scene it is, the intensity, and all sorts of things like that. So we'll talk on all of those topics when we get back from the break. You're listening to Domination Submission Radio. I'm Mike Makai. My host is L.B. Shaw. We'll be back in about 2 minutes. This is Mike Makai. You're listening to Domination Submission Radio. We're talking about aftercare. What is it? Who needs it? And why is it important? And we have on the line our friend Lil Red, who was just talking about some of her experiences with aftercare. Now, you say, Red, you say you don't need emotional aftercare. Do you think that's unusual?
For the most part, I don't, because especially under heavy impact scenes, because I like heavy impact, percussion, flogging, sadistic cuffing. For me, I need that space between the time I get done with the scene to give me time to readjust before I reconnect with people, because it tends to bring out the more dominant side in me and I get violent in return. Mm-hmm. So to give me that space, it allows that time to come down.
You do need some emotional aftercare then. I mean, because you have to take some time to return back to a normal emotional state. Otherwise, you're going to bite somebody's head off, break their bones or something. right? So I mean,
I'd rather not break their bones, but
yeah, but see, a moment ago you just said you don't need emotional aftercare, and then you continued to say that you need time to come down from that emotional state. So I mean, you do need aftercare, emotional aftercare.
It's not in the traditional sense. Most bottoms, most submissives that I've come across need that time to cuddle and need the stroking and the petting and the praise and the soft words and all that wonderful stuff, and I'm not one of them.
See, here's the problem, and I think this is where it gets a little, not just complicated, but a little stupid, I think. I think that there's been so much emphasis on the, I need cuddles afterwards thing, that people have lost their focus on what it really is and what it is really required here. Yeah, some people need cuddles. Some people need verbal encouragement and affirmation and to be told that, that you care about them and those sorts of things. But I think where we go wrong is we focus so much on the people who say I need cuddles that we forget that there are people who also need to be watched to make sure that they don't have a stroke or a heart attack, or the people who need to be left alone so they don't turn around and punch you in the nose for talking to them too soon after a scene. And this includes dominants as well as submissives. A submissive during a scene will often go into subspace where it's an altered state of consciousness. It's almost like a hypnotic state, kind of a euphoric state. And, it takes a while to come down from that. But a dominant has their own version of that in some ways. But really, sometimes you're just filled with that adrenaline and that excitement and that feeling of invincible, power. And when the scene is over, those hormones pumping through your body, that adrenaline doesn't just instantly disappear. It's still pumping. So, I mean, if I've spent the last 30 minutes whacking your butt with a paddle, and the adrenaline is pumping through my body, and I'm feeling pretty powerful at that moment, and now the scene is over, it's going to take me maybe 15 minutes, it might take me 30 minutes to really come down from that. And I like to think that I don't really need that much time to recover from something like that. But I think a lot of us believe that we're better at this than we really are. Wouldn't you agree?
Can I jump in here and say something?
Yeah, sure, Elby.
Couldn't aftercare is it something that someone is required to do for you? For me, if it's not something that's really intense, I actually prefer I'd like for my husband to be close by, but I prefer to be kind of left alone. And sometimes I just want, the quietness and the peacefulness and just to not have to move. And then there are other times that I want to grab my phone and text a friend. I need that connection to someone else that's not him, So I don't know. I guess my question isn't a person is required to provide for you. It could just be, getting a glass of water or a snack or a blanket or a corner to sit in or a cigarette or a beer. I don't know. It's something. I mean...
I really do believe that it should be treated as a part of the scene. It should be negotiated the same way the scene is. Now, of course, this is going to be different if you're talking the difference between doing this with your husband versus doing it with a play partner that you've played with before. But either way, I think that it all boils down to making sure that your partner knows what you expect of him or her and vice versa. And unfortunately, too many people kind of take it for granted that their needs are common to everyone. If you're somebody who likes to be cuddled after sex or after a BDSM scene, well, you kind of assume everybody wants to be cuddled afterwards. And, it's hard for you to even conceive that somebody might not want to be, that somebody might want to just be left alone. And so when you get it into your head that, everybody deserves to be cuddled after a scene, then you forget to mention it because you just assume everybody knows this. So I think it can be very dangerous to whenever you start, like Lolly said last week, it's when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. And it's worked in BDSM because when you assume, you could actually get hurt or somebody else could get hurt. Or who knows, sometimes the sub drop that occurs after somebody's been in subspace, somebody has had a very intense scene, sometimes that sub drop can be so intense that people become suicidal, and they don't even see it coming. They're just driving down the street, going home from a play party, and they're just like, life sucks. I think I'll just drive off this bridge, and it can be very, very dangerous. So I think that we just have to be really careful about assuming that everyone sees this the same way or everyone needs the same thing. Some people may need to be left alone. Some people may need to be cuddled. Some people may need just to be told, hey, I know I've just spent the last 90 minutes whacking your butt with a paddle, but I do love you. Because sometimes your body tells you something completely different than your heart or your mind does. In your heart, you may know that he loves you. In your mind, you may be trying to rationalize everything, but your body is going like, he just spent the last 90 minutes beating me with a stick. And so, sometimes you gotta integrate all of those things and remind yourself that just because somebody has been treating your body severely doesn't mean that they feel that way about you. And so, sometimes your brain will interpret things differently than is rational.
Right.
Yeah, it's easy to tell yourself, yes, he loves me, but your body's saying, no, he doesn't. He's hitting you with a stick. What do you think, Red?
The demo you and I had when you did the striking. You checked in with me. You made sure I was good. My back was warm, obviously. The menthol was making it warm. I wasn't dropping anywhere. You checked in with me. I was good. Checked in with you. You were happy with it. And life was good. But then you can turn around and immediately follow that up with, but we were play partners. My definition of play partners is non-sexual in nature because for me to play with somebody else besides my significant other, who is also my dom, between me and him, it's very sexual. And that's with a lot of partner, submissives and doms. It's very sexual. It ends up typically in sex in one form or another. But between play partners, it's more of a, are you okay? You're good? Great. Right. And you go on with whatever you were doing from there. For partners who play, which is very much like LB and her husband, me and my partner, a lot of it does end up very sexual and very sexual driven. So it crosses that line to a different form of everything for us. Because instead of just being that scene, it continues into possibly sex, another heavier scene.
Yeah. Well, I think Aftercare really, you have to look at it as being different for everyone. Different people have different needs. Different scenes have different needs. I think the Aftercare that has to be administered after impact play is a whole lot different than the Aftercare that might have to be administered after some bondage play, for example. Or, for that matter, the intensity. If somebody is flogging you for 5 minutes with a wimpy flogger, you may not need any aftercare. But if somebody's flogging you for 90 minutes with something that just makes your bones shudder with each strike, you might need some aftercare. So again, I think it's something that has to be applied appropriately depending on the people, depending on the scene, depending on the intensity, depending on any after effects that might be anticipated or not anticipated. I think, for example, Red, you brought up the demo that I did with you and your partner on coin striping. For all we know, one of you could have had a serious allergy to the mentholated oils that I was using. And so, you would never in a million years believe that somebody would go into anaphylactic shock over something like that. But it happens, and it can happen anytime to just about anybody. So
very true. Absolutely. This is why before I go into do anything with anybody, if I'm feeling off, if that vibe with them is feeling off, I really wouldn't go into it because of safety concerns for that. And then I would go into the negotiation, okay, what kind of floggers are we using? Are we using suede? Are we using rubber? Are we using leather? What kind of leather? Because some people have reactions to one kind of thing, depending on the dyes or how they're processed. And you can use the exact same kind of flogger, for example, that's in a different kind of leather, and they have no reaction to it other than the sensation created with the strike. So it's always, you have to go from very much a medical standpoint going, do you have any known allergies? Do you have any known conditions? You have to be very aware of everything with you, and you also have to be aware of everything with the partner you're playing with because, okay, I didn't know you had a latex allergy. kind of thing, and you put on a pair of gloves because you're going to do percussion, and you'd rather it not be skin to skin because of the possible breaking of the skin and blood happening with percussion, and you end up not knowing you had a latex allergy, and I don't know that, and we're in the middle of a scene and you drop.
Yep, it happens.
It's always a good thing to ask more questions and figure out, okay, if you're playing light, really, the 5-minute flogging, I can walk away from that and not even remember it 15 minutes later. The 90-minute flogging, I'm going to be feeling that for about a week and a half.
Right.
Adjust what you're doing and how you go about the after thing. Check in with them the day after. Check in with them 2 or 3 days later to make sure they're still doing okay, especially if there was any heavy impact or any bruising that happened, because a clotting issue could have come up.
Mm-hmm. LB says we're always scaring her, but there's a lot of things to consider.
That doesn't scare me too much.
I think that this is one of those things where you just have to go into it with your eyes open. You can't be afraid of it. It's like saying you could be hit by a bus crossing the street. That doesn't mean you stop crossing the street. It just means you look both ways before you do it. And that's kind of the way I like to talk about the lifestyle. The lifestyle has a lot of potential for things going wrong, but as long as you keep your eyes open and you know what you're getting into and you're prepared, it's no more scary than any other lifestyle out there. Thanks very much for calling in, Red. I appreciate it, as always. Remember, you were supposed to call in naked. I know, you got kids now.
It's a little difficult with 2 kids that are still awake.
I know, I'm just giving you a hard time, Red. Thanks for calling in. Bye-bye now. So we are going to take one more break, and then we'll come back. We're going to talk about top guilt. We're going to talk about aftercare kits, and we're going to talk about online play and telephone play, whether you need aftercare for that. So you're listening to Domination Submission Radio. I'm Mike Makai. My co-host is LB Shaw, and we'll be back in about 2 minutes. Talking about aftercare on tonight's show, and one of the things that we mentioned earlier that I want to bring up is the subject of top guilt. Are you familiar with that, LB?
I am familiar in that I've heard of it, yes.
Well, I haven't heard a lot of talk about it. It's not something that you hear a lot about in the lifestyle, but I think that it's fairly common sense. As we were mentioning earlier, you are doing something that, for all intents and purposes, if you didn't know that it was play, would be seen as cruel to somebody. And I think sometimes your subconscious mind tells you one thing while your conscious mind tells you something else. Your conscious mind is saying, hey, this is fine, she likes it, is what your conscious mind is telling you. But your subconscious mind may be thinking, you're hurting somebody. You're causing somebody a great deal of grief. And so there's this cognitive dissonance, I guess the way they put it. And sometimes for some people it's very hard to reconcile in their brains, because one side of your brain is saying, hey, this is fun, that she likes it, this is an enjoyable activity for everyone. The other side of your brain is saying, you are hurting somebody. Why are you doing this? What are you, some kind of a monster? Do you enjoy hurting the people that you care about? And so you get this inner conflict going. And some people it's really no conflict at all, but there are other people where it's a big deal. It actually causes some turmoil and some guilt, unresolved guilt in their brains, and it can cause problems for not just the dominant himself, but for the people he might interact with later. So it's something that you might want to be aware of, just in the sense that sometimes people do have this inner turmoil going that isn't necessarily completely reconciled in their own brains. I know you get into the heads of your characters in your novels, LB. I mean, is this something that you can kind of relate to and understand?
I can certainly understand it just from my own personal experience. That's not something that we come up against, but in Becoming Stone, the main character is a sadist, so I don't see him as anyone that deals with any type of intense guilt, but also the female main character is very new to the lifestyle, and I think he goes, in the beginning at least, goes very easy on her. But yeah, I think just for me personally, I'm not an extreme masochist or anything. I enjoy small amounts of pain and small doses, I guess, but my husband really enjoys the reaction that he gets, so I don't think he has to deal with any of that sort of guilt. But it certainly makes sense that could certainly happen.
Well, in my book, I talk about one of the stories where I was unclear on the concept of extreme masochism, and I even write a little poem, a little Dr. Seuss poem that people have enjoyed. I've gotten a lot of great feedback about it. But in this particular instance, I had spent a 3-day weekend with a submissive that I had actually met online. This was many, many years ago. And we stayed at a really nice resort in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And, the first couple of days were great, very much what I expected anyway. But on the third day, she pulls out her toy box, and she pulls out a hammer and some 10-penny nails and says, would you pound these nails through my nipples, please? And I just could not bring myself to do it. Here I've been doing BDSM play all of my life. I consider myself pretty good at most types of sadistic BDSM play, but this was just not something that I was going to be willing to do in this particular instance. And so sometimes you can be really unclear on the concept of what is and what isn't extreme masochism. I had heard her say this on a couple occasions. I'm an extreme masochist. I thought, okay, I know what that means. Well, no, I didn't. Because in her mind, an extreme masochist means you're willing to pound nails through her nipples. And I just wasn't willing to do that. So, yeah, it can be...
I can't even pop a pimple. I can't see myself topping someone anyway, but there's no way I could do something like that. I literally almost fainted years ago when my husband asked me to pop a pimple on his back. I almost blacked out. So I can understand not being able to do something like that.
Well, I'm not sure where I was going with that story. Oh, I know where I was going with that story. The point being, though, that you really don't always know what's going through somebody else's head. You really don't. And sometimes it comes as a huge surprise to you when you find out that, okay, this person expects this from me or expects that from me. So, it can be very surprising and a little unnerving. In fact, while I was talking, I was looking for that little thing that I wrote. It's a little poem I wrote. I tell the story in my book. Not only did she ask me to pound nails through her nipples, but then she asked me to close up her labia with giant safety pins. And, I didn't even have to think about that. It's like, okay, not only will I not pound nails through your nipples, but I'm not going to close up your vagina with a safety pin. So anyway, I wrote this little poem. It goes like this. I will not pin your pussy once. I will not pin your pussy twice. Not with a needle, not even with ice. Won't close it with a safety or other sharp pin. Won't close it at all. I might want to get in. I don't want to nail your pretty pink nipple. Not one of them, both of them, or even a triple. I will not do it on the table and not on the floor. I'm just unable. Masochists, I do understand. I'll give them spankings with my hand. I'll paddle and whip and chain their asses. I'll even dip them in molasses. But I never have, nor shall I start, punch bloody holes in body parts. The closest I'll get is I'll cut you loose and send my regrets to Dr. Seuss.
I think you found your calling.
So if you haven't got my book yet, you just heard the best part of it on the radio. So
I actually read that today. I read that part today.
Very cool.
Yes.
Yeah. Believe it or not, I wasn't going to put that in. I thought it was too silly, but a few of my friends convinced me that it ought to go in, so I left it in. Anyway, so we're pretty much at the end of our time. Tell us when your book's coming out, LB.
Well, The Coming Stone is probably going to be a couple of months before I get it finished up. I say a couple of months at the most, hopefully, but I did get another one released, of a short story, BDSM. It's actually published today, called Little Sinner, and I think I mentioned it last week, it kind of focuses on a priest fetish, and so that's available if anyone wants to check that one out.
Super. We'll definitely do that. And my book's doing all right. It's been out about 2 weeks now. It has gone, when it was released 2 weeks ago, it was ranked number 100,000 as an author. I'm now up to number 29,000. In the Kindle store, it's gone from number 1 million to number 27,000. So it's moving up.
That's good.
Yeah, it's in the top 1,000 in a couple different categories, and it's in the top 100 books in the country in 2 different categories: marriage and love and relationships. We're moving up, so check it out if you haven't had a chance to check out. Oh, I have one more bit of news. I'll be doing my first book signing. For those of you who know me personally, right here in town, I'll be doing a book signing on November the 1st, so stay tuned for more details on that. It'll be at the local Hastings bookstore. So I look forward to seeing you there, and I'll assign all your books right then and there if you want. If you haven't got it yet, you'll be able to get it from the store there. I want to thank you all for listening. You got any last words you want to throw out there, LB, before we close up the show?
I don't think I have any last words tonight. Sorry.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for listening to Domination Submission Radio. This is Mike Makai, LB Shaw. We'll look for you next week. Take care now.